We begin the hour with brand new CNN reporting on the Justice Department's January 6th investigation. Sources telling CNN Donald Trump's attorneys are waging a secret court fight to stop a grand jury from gathering information from Mr. Trump's inner circle. Now, the fight broke into public view yesterday, and CNN teams 3 lawyers for the former president at the federal courthouse here in Washington. Now, the back-and-forth battle follows a deluge of new subpoenas from federal prosecutors demanding evidence from a slew of former Trump aides and associates. Let's bring in CNN senior justice correspondent Evan Perez and CNN senior crime and justice reporter Caitlin Polantz. Caitlin, I want to start with you here. How does this work? Explain the details here and why they matter.
Right. Well, right now we're in secrecy, or this proceeding is veiled in secrecy because that is what's ongoing. It's a grand jury proceeding where the Justice Department is trying to get information into the grand jury, including around Donald Trump, around the White House, potentially even from attorneys of his. And at this turning point, right now, the Trump lawyers, these 3 men that we did see exiting the federal court yesterday, John Rowley, Evan Corcoran, Tim Parlatore, they're representing Donald Trump. They're opposite the Justice Department. And in court before a judge, they would be arguing that they're trying to keep information out of the grand jury's hands, keep witnesses from turning over or testifying about information because Donald Trump wants to assert various privileges. That could include executive privilege as well as attorney-client privilege. The judge would ultimately have to decide, but huge implications and really a step forward for both the Trump team and the Justice Department. Right?
Evan, there's 2 things I want to get into. One about a specific witness. But first, look, I feel like I ask both you and Caitlin almost every single week. Can you top line this for me? Can you explain? There's so many different moving parts here. It's such a fluid situation. When you report on this, when you talk to sources about this specific issue, what does this mean, big picture, for how things are progressing?
The big picture here is that this is the most aggressive step that the Justice Department has taken to get through this firewall that the former president has been trying to build. And sources have told me and Caitlin and Zach Cohen that this fight, they've been girding for this, right? The Justice Department has been girding for the possibility that, once they bring in witnesses, some of these important witnesses, like the former White House counsel, Pat Cipollone, his deputy, Pat Philbin, that they're going to have to go back and ask them questions that would get through that privilege claim that the former president is making. And so now that has begun.
The one specific witness that I want to ask you about, we know that Eric Hirschman, a former White House attorney, I believe was scheduled to give testimony on September 2nd. What's the latest with that?
Well, his testimony was delayed, and at least some of this fight appears to be centered around him and some of the other witnesses who the former president has given these vague instructions, broad claims of privilege, which has caused this fight to evolve. And so how this works out will be a huge, huge thing for the Justice Department. To get this information is key before they make a decision on who gets charged, whether it's former president himself or some of the people who are around him who are trying to overturn the 2020 election.
And Caitlin, as our resident legal whiz on all the things, the privilege claim, just generally right now, there's been a lot of questions in kind of legal circles about how much validity it actually has. When you talk to people who are paying close attention to this, what's their sense of whether or not the president's team, either in this case specifically or more broadly, actually have rational backing with what they're trying to argue right now?
Yeah, I mean, these are very serious issues that Donald Trump would be raising here. Executive privilege. There's law that hasn't ever been settled in that area. We're in uncharted territory as we find ourselves with Donald Trump occasionally in court. But in this sort of thing, if history is any guide, if legal precedent is any guide, if there are attorney-client privileges, confidentiality between the attorney talking to a client, so the client would be Donald Trump, those often fall away very, very quickly in criminal investigations whenever there's a real need for this. The executive privilege is a little bit harder to get past for criminal investigators, but, Richard Nixon was trying to assert these sorts of things. The Supreme Court had rulings on that ultimately led to his departure from the White House.
Evan, do we know what prosecutors want to use this info for? There's obviously a ton we can't see that's been kind of made very clear over the course of the last several weeks with all the subpoenas. What's the intent here? What are they going for?
Well, we know from our own reporting and from some of the things we've seen in public that there are some targets that clearly are in sight, and that includes Jeffrey Clark, John Eastman, these are people who are involved in trying to stop Donald Trump from leaving office and to keep him in power despite the fact he lost the election. So those two are absolutely more likely to be, facing charges at some point. Beyond that, I mean, there are other people who the prosecutors clearly have a deep interest in. Rudy Giuliani is one of them. And then there's all those people who are trying to set up the fake elector scheme, right? And of course, the former president himself. Of course, he's obviously the one who was helping to guide all of this, and it's not clear whether prosecutors can get there, but this is part of what they're trying to do.
And we know that there are witnesses that were inside the White House that have been called to the grand jury from the White House counsel's office, as well as from the vice president's office.
Yeah, there's just so many different elements of this still. You guys are doing a great job reporting on all of it and answering my questions when I call you randomly at like 6 in the morning. Caitlin Pullins, Evan Perez, thanks guys so much.